Good morning, everybody. Forgot how to get out here on time. If we have never met, my name is Hughes. I am the adult discipleship pastor here at Midway. We are, it's funny because when I introduce myself as the adult discipleship pastor, people don't necessarily know what that means. They say, oh, especially in the secular world. A few months ago, I went to jury duty, and, I didn't want to come off as the pastor of Midway Church. So I said, I'm the adult discipleship pastor. And both the attorneys just kind of looked at the judge like, who is this guy? I was like, my responsibility is to work primarily with life groups and to run our life group ministry at the church. But then also it's some level of the responsibility to grow our character and maturity in Christ for anybody in the body, somewhere between 18 to going on to heaven, however you want to describe it. And so that's kind of my job at Midway. And so for some people, they get it. Some people, they don't get it. Really kind of depends on if you've been around church world or not. But what's interesting is this morning, we are going to come to a discussion in this series called Together, the glue that binds, on core values. You've heard a lot of core values so far. This one is one more core value of our church. And now when we mention a core value, what we mean by that is a distinction, many times biblically founded. It's foundationally biblical first, but then is culturally distinct in how we approach it as a church. What I mean by that is this, that it is unique in some ways. It's not that other churches don't do it, but it's unique to the Midway mission. It's unique in the way that we as a body take it upon ourselves to succeed at this core value. Hopefully on our best days, what it is it's distinct about what you can expect when you meet someone who claims to be a part of the Midway mission or the body of Midway. And so all of these core values you've heard so far, I don't know if you signed up for that or not, that's what we're saying when we approach explaining how God has uniquely empowered us to go to Carroll County, the surrounding counties, the state of Georgia, the US, the world. This is what uniquely makes us Midway. So in this process, today we are going to be looking at they don't really have numbers, so if you've ever seen a struggle with numbers, there's no order to these, but I think we're on 8, it may be 7, I'd have to go back and count, but it's living big through generosity. We live big through generosity. This is one of the core values of Midway, that we are generous, and in that giving, we produce something bigger than ourselves. And so we're going to hover around this core value this morning. But what's interesting about this core value is that the character of Christ is built in us as we engage this value. And I'm really gonna hover around that main idea. We have a great series around November every year where we talk about generosity, where we talk about stewardship. And listen, if pastors could be accused of anything, it's that they like to talk about tithing every once in a while. And there's a great series that we do in November for that. Today, I wanna reach for a deeper question. And I think it all starts for many of us in a completely different arena than what we normally think of when it comes to being generous with our money or our time or our talents. And the way I like to describe it is I like to describe it as the problem of paradox, or the paradox problem. And it's this paradox. Now, to understand a paradox, most of you probably know what a paradox is, but a paradox is a personal paradox would be a situation in which two truths that are completely opposed seem to simultaneously happen in your life over and over again. They say, well, that can't possibly happen. Exactly, it's a paradox. But you have two truths that are completely opposite that you seem to be living out at the exact same time. And that paradox looks largely like this. First, no one in this room, as far as I know, maybe you should come preach this sermon if you've got this figured out, but no one in this room likes to be wrong, right? Raise your hand if you like to be wrong. You don't like a nice piece of chocolate or, a nice summer day on the beach or a nice relaxing vacation in the mountains. You just like to genuinely be wrong most of the time. Anybody in the room, that's your favorite thing. You know what I mean? Just and so we try to be faultless, right? I'm reminded that I hate this perspective because I find it so hard to apologize to my wife. Right? I mean, it's my favorite thing to do. Honey, I am just humbled, humiliated, and ready to say I'm sorry. You're right, that was the turn to Disney World. I did miss it a few miles back. We will have to turn around. I shouldn't have brought up Buc-ee's in the car. You can tell where my theme has been over the past few days. But none of us likes to admit fault. We want to be faultless. But the paradox is this. The more we look at our lives and investigate our lives and put our lives under a microscope to make sure that we are faultless, the more faults we see. And the more controlling we get about fixing them. And the more maybe manic or crazy. I mean, have you ever painted a baseboard in your house the original white that came with the contractor? They swear it's the same white. But I just can't believe that. If you paint that baseboard, you might as well burn your house down and start over. And the more you look at it, the more faults you see. You see the dust and the cobwebs in the corner. How the hardwood doesn't seem to match the baseboard quite right anymore. Because we find this paradox that we live with. We don't like problems, but we see problems. And the more we look to fix the problems, the more problems we have. It's the paradox of the problem. And see, I think for many of us, we find ourselves perpetually frustrated because we look and we see time and time again that we don't want anything less than perfection. But everything is less than perfect. And the more and more we look, the more and more we are painfully aware. It's interesting. Because I think for many of us, we look around and it's funny with the baseboards. It's funny when you're trying to apologize to your wife sometimes. But you look around at your life and it comes out in questions like these. How come my family is so messed up? My family can't even get together for an Instagram photo, let alone get the right filters on. My situation, how come I am always looking for a job every 2 years, every 3 years? Doesn't anybody understand that we have it harder than anyone else? What would it take for my kids to be nice to me once? And everybody else's kids just seem so successful and so respectful. And we look, and we look. Maybe you're younger in this room and you think, oh man, like I'm looking for the person God created me for, and I want to reach out and I want to be married, or I want to have a relationship, but like everybody else has someone, I don't have anyone. And so what you do is instead of looking for the person that God is trying to turn you into to be that person, you begin to focus on your faults. Well, maybe they don't like me because I'm not skinny enough. Maybe they don't like me because I'm not fat enough. Maybe they don't like me because I don't have a big enough Instagram following. Maybe they don't like me because I don't have straight teeth. Maybe they don't like me because I have crooked teeth. Maybe whatever it is, you begin to focus. And we don't realize that the more and more we focus, the more and more we'll find things wrong with our situation. You're not fixing it, you're breaking it more. It's the problem of the paradox. And we bring all this stress, and we bring on this anxiety, and we bring all this shattered sense of self along with us in our journey. And then we wonder why we're the most unhappy generation to date when we've had everything at our fingertips since the moment we've been born. Because see, the great issue that you and I find in the problem of the paradox problem, is that you could drown in a lake of fresh water, and you could starve in a room full of food. Because the more you focus on the problems, the more you're focused on yourself, and yourself will never provide the sustenance that you need to survive. The sustenance that you need to survive. And the Apostle Paul, he says it like this. In Romans 7, he says, see if you can discern the problem of the paradox in this chapter. For I do not understand what I am doing, says the Apostle Paul, because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate. For I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my flesh, for the desire to do what is good is with me, but there is no ability to do it. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but I practice the evil that I do not want to do. So I discover this law. When I want to do what is good, evil is present with me. For in my inner self, I delight in God's law, but I see a different law at work in the parts of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and taking me prisoner to the law of sin in the parts of my body. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? See, in this moment, Paul is saying, I want to do the right thing. But the more I focus on trying to do the right thing, the more it is obvious that all I do is the wrong thing. And then I get bummed, or I begin to lose focus on the fact that all I do is the wrong thing. But it all started with the desire to do the right thing. What a wretched man I am. Who can save me from this paradox I find myself in? And now you may say, this is a great sermon so far, Luke, but how does this have anything to do with generosity? And let's be honest, we're supposed to talk about the core value. We live big through generosity. How does this have anything to do with generosity? Well, the truth is, this has everything to do with generosity. It has everything to do with generosity because it's all about your attention and your perspective. Because what I need you to understand is I need you to feel something deeper than just you should give money, or you should be generous, or you should donate your time. When it comes to the process of reversing the paradox it's about your very survival. When it comes to the process of seeing a perspective that is altogether different than the perspective you bring to your stuff, it's about survival. See, I would challenge you with this morning as we step into this conversation deeper. You need you to be generous more than the church or anybody else will ever need you to be generous. Listen, God is the God of the cattle on 1,000 hills. And at the end of the day, we are very thankful. Love that you want to be a part. Genuinely convicted that God moves in powerful ways when we give together. But God doesn't need your money. You need you to be generous, or you'll die on the beaches of the paradox. Surrounded by all that could give you life, but focused on only those things that bring you death. If you have your copy of God's words this morning, we're going to open up to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Why are we generous? Why are we generous? 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And we're going to go to a very simple passage beginning in verse 6. Beginning in verse 6. This is a very simple setup for a passage, and it's very straightforward. The Apostle Paul is talking to a church that he planted in Corinth. These are his people, a church that he prepared, that he led in a lot of different ways. There's been some bumps in the road, but he is invested in their spiritual journey. And not only is he invested in their spiritual journey, he's invested in seeing the best come out of their lives as they move closer and closer to Jesus. And so to that end, he encourages them through this passage, in this specific instance, to be generous to churches that are based in Jerusalem. In fact, Paul has been going around taking up a collection to take to churches in the Jerusalem area because the churches in Jerusalem, as best as we can understand, are probably going through a time of famine, definitely going through a time of hardship because of their proximity to the capital in Jerusalem leads to religious persecution that is regular. That doesn't happen throughout Asia Minor and the rest of the Roman Empire, but also is the birthplace of the very salvation they claim. So the people that gave first, sacrificed first, built the foundation on which they now stand, sits in the elders and the people and the needs that are now prevalent in Jerusalem. And so Paul starts out the passage like this in verse 6. Remember this, Corinthians. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And it is God who is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. See, generosity is to mark the people of God. Generosity is to mark the people of God. And the first point is this: a big life comes from being generous, not selfish. If you're going to live a big life in generosity, generosity comes and then you are generous, not selfish. See, the power of the paradox is that we lack faith in God's ability to provide for us. The idea that for you and for me, when we begin to myopically focus on the things in our life, what we're actively telling God is, you can't handle this reality. So when it comes to the process of our stuff or our financial future or the things that we look to for security, if we put trust in ourselves, what we are saying to God is that we lack the faith to give that locus of control, to give it over to Him. And so what this passage says, the Apostle Paul comes and says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. See, what Paul raises is a question of faith. He says in this moment, do you trust that God is able to provide all that you need in all situations, not just so that you can be taken care of, but so that you can be generous? And what Paul is moving towards in this moment is the realization of gratitude. That all things, regardless, come from God as a gift. See, when we approach things from a selfish perspective, what we are really saying is that I've earned these things. So when we come to a glass and it's, metaphorically half empty, for many of us in the room, when we approach it from a selfish perspective, we see the glass as half empty and we say, I didn't get what I deserve. I didn't get what I was due. I didn't get what I earned. But when we approach from a generous or a gratitude-filled perspective, what we see is that everything, the glass, the table, the water, is a gift from the Lord. And I understand, in the enterprise of America, in entrepreneurialism, in all the self-made men that are around me right now, that is an affront to us to say, well, I did a little bit of the hard work. Every gift that's given to you is a gift from the Lord. That breath right now, did you earn that? That heartbeat right now, did you earn that? That mind that thinks clearly to plan and to strategize, did you earn that? There are plenty that don't have the same. It's a gift. It's a gift from the Lord. You didn't earn it. You can't control it. Even after thousands of years of technology, you have no ability to extend your life beyond what the Lord desires. Jesus brings up this issue on the issue of gratitude. Because I think for many of us, you'd say, yeah, of course, people are ungrateful. They need to learn gratitude. What happens when you're given so many good things that you lose perspective on the most important thing? Because see, Jesus brings to the situation, he says, okay, there's a guy. He was a successful businessman. All the money you could hope for. He invested in Home Depot early. And the good news came in. Luke 12, it says, you are rich beyond your wildest dreams. And the man sat and he thought and he sat and he thought and he came up with a brilliant idea. I know what I'll do. All these barns that store my goods, I've got more than I could ever need. I'll tear the barns down and I'll rebuild with 10, 20 times, 50 times sized barns so that finally I'll be able to fit all of my possessions, all of my goods in my kingdom, my realm again. Do you know the end of the story? Jesus says, there's only one ironically sad thing. That night, an angel of the Lord came to the man and said, you wicked fool, tonight, your life is demanded of you. So all that wasted effort, all that worry and that anxiety, all that selfishness, it's gone. It's gone, it's over. You should have just been grateful for the few extra minutes you had left instead of worried about all the stuff that was never yours in the first place. if you want to live a big life, you have to learn to be generous and not selfish. It's a tectonic shift in personhood. Because when we move from selfishness to gratitude, it's amazing how not only does the value of our stuff change, but our willingness to give of it shifts as well. Because when we shift our mindset from that, this is mine and I have to protect it, to God has given it and it is his to do with as he pleases, it amazes me how quickly individuals go from I don't have enough to give to God gave me something to give. To the realization that you may not have all the money you want, but you have enough money to be generous right now. Because listen, it doesn't matter how many excuses you make for your selfishness. You need you to be generous more than anyone else needs you to be generous. Continuing on in the passage, this is what it says. The second point is this: big living comes from generative people. Big living comes from generative people. Generosity at its root is generative. You are never more like God as creator than when you are sowing into a space that is generating life. Back in the passage, verse 9, as it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Big living comes from generative people. See, when you are generous, you are naturally generative. But when you are selfish, you stymie the flow of life. You stymie the ability to reach out and create something where it wasn't there. Jesus in his own words says, listen, unless a tare or a wheat dies, it will never produce a harvest. And so for each one of us, we are called to live generously, to generate things that aren't seen or even there yet in the process of our giving. Yeah, and when it comes to the problem of paradox, you see this clearly. And the reason I bring this up is because it's such a relevant conversation in circles like these, in church circles. Because everyone I talk to, they want to be more righteous. They want to be better people. They want to be, hopefully, more like Christ. And what's interesting is many times people hit a roadblock or a ceiling in their process of self-growth in holiness or righteousness. And they come and they're frustrated or they're angry or they have an addiction or there's something going on and they say, I try and I try and I try and I just can't find any breakthrough. This was my situation early on in my pastoring career when I was in Los Angeles at seminary. I found that there were times I was called to be a better leader, and the reason I couldn't succeed at being a better leader had nothing to do with my leadership acumen. It had to do with the fact that I was simply a crummy person. A crummy person. And so I went to someone that was in charge of mentoring me, God rest his soul, it's just, and I said, what do I need to do to get better? He said, Luke, I've got a solution. I said, okay. I said, give me the Bible study. Give me the 10 steps. What do give me the book I need to read, the latest leadership guru book. And he said, no, it's none of that stuff. He said, you need to meet me at 9:45 p.m. on the south side of Hollywood 2 days from now. I said, okay. And so I show up to this gymnasium at about 9:45 p.m. and some rough characters are kind of like walking in the gym. Clothes are tattered. There's kind of a little bit of an odor going on. It was loud. It was confusing. And I walked in and I found my mentor and I said, hey, well, what are we doing here? He said, well, tonight what we're doing is we're gonna buddy up with some of these homeless individuals here in South LA, and we are gonna walk them through and help them understand these social services that are available to them tonight, because they'll probably need a conversation or an explanation or someone just to sit with them and spend time with them in a personal way to help them understand what they really need to get something from these services. And I said, oh, I thought we were doing leadership training. And he grunted at me in his typical fashion. And we went off and we worked through the night. And it didn't stop there. There were other projects and other opportunities and moments to serve and serve and serve again. And what I realized through that process is that in the serving, I was getting breakthrough that I never would have got had I been focused on myself. Because it's kind of like the metaphor of a garden. And you may have heard me explain this before, but for many of us in the room, you're a good looking set of soil, okay? You're looking vivacious. This morning, like you could really grow some fruit. And I think for many of us in the room, what Christianity boils down to is this. Okay, we're all in the room. We all have got some soil, got to grow this fruits of the Spirit. Oh, look, a weed. You start pulling a weed, right? Because, you got some issues, got some baggage in your past, some addictions. And then you say, oh, no, look, another weed. You start pulling the weeds over there. You're pulling weeds all out of your life. And man, you are really creating an awesome patch of dirt, okay? Because you're just weeding everywhere. The weeds come up, you get them out of there. Dandelions, gone. Everything, gone. But the only problem with weeding soil, you know what it makes it perfect for? More weeds. More weeds. And you're not even called primarily to weed. Your mission is to make the fruit grow. Is to make the fruit grow, which means you got to plant. It means you've got to watch and water. Maybe support. Delicately raise this garden from the dirt. But I think for many of us, we think we're doing a great job when we look out and all we see is a barren field because all the weeds are gone until next week. It's the problem of the paradox. The more weeds you pull, the more weeds you get. The more weeds you get. But you're called to plant the fruit and to tend it as it grows. As it grows. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. You know what's really hard to do about those fruits? It's really hard to do those fruits alone. And see, the wisdom of my mentor is he just took a chance that maybe Jesus cared less about me not doing bad things and more about the quality and the character and the service by which I started to learn to do good things, and the bad things would naturally get choked out. Because you know what I learned? God's not waiting for you to be perfect to get in the game. God's not waiting for you to beat that addiction before you step in faith and obedience to the clear calls he's given you. Pulling the weeds will never make the fruit grow. It's the problem of the paradox. Generous people are generative people. They create life where there was once a barren patch of dirt. Because they plant. Look back at the passage if you don't believe me. Verse 10, now he who supplies to the sower, who is he? God. And bread for food, taking care of basic needs, will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. Now listen, stereotypically, when I hear this, what I hear is more money until you actually read what it says. And will enlarge the harvest of your finances, right? Your bankroll, right? Your stock options, right? Will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. What does being generative create? Listen, if it may create more stock options, it may create more money, it may create more opportunities like that, but the first thing it's gonna be creating is the thing that you've always cared about that you can't find breakthrough. It's righteousness. When you are generous, you are never more like God than when you are giving, planting, bringing life where there was no life, and finding a harvest of righteousness. This is the last point. Big living is achieved when your dreams align with Christ's character. Big living is achieved when your dreams align with Christ's character. Now lean in with me here just a little bit because I'm gonna finish up with this. The service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, others will praise for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ, and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. When our dreams do not align with the character of Christ, your dreams, because of the problem of the paradox, will quickly become nightmares. And the great irony of your life is that you could be doing exactly what you are called to do, but if you're doing it in your own power, it won't be a dream that sustains, it will be a nightmare that consumes. It will be a nightmare that consumes. It's why your dream job may take hold of you and ruin your family. It's why you may look around and you may be wondering, why does my family environment feel like a toxic waste dump? Because when you do things in your own strength and in your own power and in the problem of the paradox, everything shatters and breaks. But when you do it in the strength and in the conviction of the character of Christ, it changes you, sustains you, and reminds you what you were truly created for. So your dreams have to align to the character of Christ. That's what the passage says, right? Right here in this moment, it says, the service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, and not only is it giving and is it generous, but it's also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. So as you serve, there's expressions of thanks to not you and your kingdom and the things you do, because remember, anytime we focus on you, we lose life and we lose perspective and we shatter. But on something bigger, expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, others will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ. That when you confess the good news of Christ, he that gave everything to you, you are now giving, and for generosity in sharing with them, it results in praise to God. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. For his indescribable gift. The final thought is this. God gives an indescribable gift so that we may be participants in the supernatural and the divine. So that we may be participants in the supernatural and the divine. Because see, what's interesting to me is I never really kind of zeroed in on the last part of this passage, but it says, because of the surpassing grace God has given to you. What is the grace? I mean, yes, it's the gift that allows for generosity, but what is that thing that is being given? Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. His indescribable gift. What is this gift? And then you realize the indescribable gift is the normal process by which you and I live out our lives to see the works of a supernatural God over and over again through his people. Over and over and over again through his people. Because this is what I want you to understand, and lean in, and we're done. But this is something that I think is so pivotal for our time. In an age of deconstruction, in a time when people are questioning everything, people are looking and they're wondering, what is real about God? How can I know that he is there? And there are age-old arguments that go back and forth, and some people are convinced and some people are not convinced. But listen, the reason I am still an evangelical, the reason I hold on to, one of these last little struggling little brother face, the reason I am an evangelical at heart is this one specific thing. And it's the unending process of holding on to the one deepest, most powerful thing, and that is that only my relationship to Jesus is the thing that will change my life forever. Only my relationship with Jesus is the only thing that will change my life forever. But now listen. And the reason I believe that is because everything in my life has taught me that up to this point. There's a relationship with my dad that changed my life forever. There may have been a relationship with your coach, with your grandma, with your aunt, someone in this world. It's always been people and their relationship to me that has changed my life forever. Putting trust in their sacrificial willingness to lean into my life is what really made the difference. So God chooses in his wisdom to do the exact same thing. How will they trust me? I'll put on flesh and blood and I'll come to them, and it will be exactly like every other relationship. That coach, that priest, that person that invested, that college advisor, whoever it was that shifted your life into the salvation of the Lord, that trust is what I'm gonna do this when I come and tabernacle among them. Now they'll get it. I came in a regular tent, but now I'm coming in a human tent, and they'll understand. They'll understand. They'll get it. They'll finally trust me. It's written in your DNA. You have the capacity to understand all that God is doing right now, because he wills it to be so. But there is one difference. There is one difference, and it's this. Largely, your experience and my experience of Jesus, the Jesus of history, through the Holy Spirit, will be, unless, now, it's crazier things have happened. Okay, so I'm not putting this on all of you. This has just been my experience. He is largely invisible, and he is largely inaudible. Meaning I have not seen him, and I have not heard him. And he said that. He said that to Thomas. He said to Thomas, you got to see me. You got to touch me. But listen, blessed are everybody in this room, because there will come a time where my main mode, they won't see me and they won't touch me. But in the same way you believe, Thomas, they will believe. Blessed are they. Holy are they. Special are they. Anointed are they. Because they're not gonna get what you get, Thomas, but it's the exact same thing. So you and I have to live out the process of figuring out how to have an interpersonal relationship, not with our coach, not with our dad, not with our mom, not with our grandma, but with the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But he is largely inaudible, and he is largely invisible. That's the key to our faith. It's why we read the scriptures. It's why we sing and we worship. It's to strengthen and to bolster and to understand that God is doing something, even though sometimes it's hard to see beneath the surface. Because if he came through in all his might and in all his glory, we may be saved, but all that find themselves on the wrong side of history would not. They would be consumed. So we're walking this divine dance. Generosity is one of the bridges across the invisible and the inaudible. It's an indescribable gift, Paul says. Because what you do is when you give in faith, God responds and reminds you that that's always the case. It's a tangible thing, a physical thing, a concrete thing we do that affects an unseen, just as real realm. When you give, it's like you're touching Jesus on the other side. You want to strengthen your faith? Give. You want to strengthen your faith? Step into the concrete practices of hearing the inaudible and seeing the invisible. See, when you understand that, we're going to do a baptism next hour. That's why you understand baptism. What is going on? We're dunking people in water up here. Yeah, it's holy water. No, it's not holy water. Came out of the Chattahoochee. Oh, it's a real special. It's actually really not special. Nothing about the sacrament is special. You know, there's times they did in the desert. It's different. Believe it or not, in church history, there's a time where you dunked them forward, not backwards. Worship wars. I'm just kidding. It's a physical symbol of a spiritual reality to help you better understand that just because you can't see him and just because most of the time you can't hear him, he is here among us right now. Changing hearts right now. Calling you out in faith right now. See, it's interesting. I'm done with this. My destruction friends, my people that are destructing their faith, I really have a goal, okay? And the goal is not to impress them. It's not to show them how smart Christianity is. It's really none of those things. I just want them to be honest. And if you're living in a relationship with Jesus that I'm talking about, there's only one way to deconstruct. and it's in the Gospels. There was a time where Jesus was giving a hard teaching, and a lot of disciples looked at Jesus and said, I'm not gonna obey that. I'm gonna walk away. And Jesus looked at the 12 and said, are you going to walk away too? And Peter's response is very telling. He says, we've journeyed with you, we've traveled with you. Who else has the words of life but you? You know, when he says the words of life, what he means, you make sense of my day in and my day out. I'm whole when I'm with you. Where else could I go? It shouldn't be an easy intellectual argument to walk away from. We should have to say, Jesus, I knew you, but I want no part with you. It should break our heart. But this morning, my question to you is, do you know him? Do you know he that is largely inaudible and largely invisible? Because just like you met that person that changed your life forever, Jesus now offers himself in that same way of meeting. As funny as it sounds, when you say that prayer of salvation, what you're doing is you're shaking hands with Jesus, and Jesus is saying, hey, I'm Jesus, the Christ. And if you'll stick with me, I'm gonna change your life forever. I'm gonna change your life forever. If that's you this morning, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me as we close? Dear Jesus, I pray you're meeting people all across this room this morning. It's not magic. It's not emotional even. It's not religious. It's very real. I don't know if anybody else in this room has ever met an invisible person before, but besides that, it's very real and much the same. If you're here this morning and you want to follow Jesus, you want to meet him, trust him, and learn what this life of faith is all about, shake his hand. Tell him that you want him to teach you to trust him. That even though you may not see or hear all the time, that he would get your attention somehow and move you forward. Those prayers of faith, God, we lift up to you, knowing and trusting your heart and your love. You are a generous God, giving all parts of yourself to us. Teach us to do the same. Amen.